Okay, morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to make a start. We haven't got the full complement of people we thought we might have along, but I think we've got a good number. So let's get started. If people come during the session, then that's fine. So thank you for your time this morning, coming along to see us for this pre-conference session. I'm Jason.
I'm Partha.
Partha. So I'm account executive here at AvePoint, and Partha's our head of technical delivery. So very pleased to have you at our session. So we're going to do a quick introduction, quick background on the challenge, if you like, around Copilot and how we mitigate some of the storage challenges we're seeing in higher education, and also some of the risks of oversharing with generative AI. And then Partha's, I'm going to hand over, once we've looked at what those challenges are, hand over to Partha to take you through what the solution looks like in terms of getting a handle on the data, really understanding it so we can actually make strategic decisions on that data. And also understanding where those risks lie within your tenant. What's the challenge at the moment with permissions? So that's what we're going to cover. There's not so many people here that we can't do questions as we go through. So if anyone has a burning question, please put your hand up and we'll tackle it as we go through. If we have any questions that we can't answer as we go through, we can always come back to you afterwards. We are on booth 80, so please organise to come and see us separately as well if you'd like a one-to-one conversation about it. We already have a few people coming over to see us later as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So just very quickly, I know there's lots of familiar faces in the room, but for those who don't know AvePoint, we've been around since 2001. Our CEO and founder had a close shave, escaping from the World Trade Centers, started working with Microsoft internal collaboration platform, backing it up and migrating data. And of course, that then went on to become SharePoint. And since then, we've been working very closely with Microsoft as one of their depth managed partners, complementing the platform and bridging the gap to enable organizations to right-size things like management, migration, governance, and protection of the platform. So we really exist to help you to maximize your investment in 365 and other SaaS platforms. What we try and do is enable you to have control at the center, an illusion of freedom for end users so they can get on and do what they want. But those controls baked in, but invisible. And I know that's very difficult at the moment to achieve with a lot of the manual processes that you have to go through. So the backdrop of the conversation today is following some big changes that have happened in 2023. We know that Microsoft changed the storage limits in August last year. And we know that's caused a lot of challenges within the sector. And if you think about it, going back to COVID and pre-COVID, a lot of you rolled out 365 as your platform to deliver remote working. And if you like, modernize the way you work. But actually, what the sector hasn't done is modernized its information management practices. They are lacking in many regards. So there isn't retention, there isn't sensitivity, data ownership is often unknown as well, as is access. And that is causing, obviously, some of the challenges we see today, particularly with the advent of generative AI as well. So let's take storage. We know that lots of universities have got storage that's been gathering up over many years, gathering dust, and we don't know exactly what it is. In many cases, it's unstructured, unclassified data. So if you imagine a situation where we ask an intelligent student to start using Copilot and actually generate maybe a PowerPoint presentation with 50 artworks in it, pictures and videos, that file might be 300 gigabytes to start with. If autosave is on that file and that person is then collaborating with 10, 15 people and it creates 15 versions of that same document, that effectively is 15 times your original storage size and so forth. And so it goes on. And this is what's basically been happening. And obviously, generative AI is going to accelerate some of those challenges that we're seeing at the moment with storage. Privacy is obviously another key challenge. So if we go back to that same example, how do we know that those images that have been put into that deck by the student, actually they have right to use them, or they can even share them? Often we see universities where they'll share a link with somebody, and they'll share it with someone else, and that person externally to the university can still access the original file. So we need to be really careful with this and get a handle on who can share, what they're doing, and make sure that permissions are in the right place. So I'm sure a lot of you have started exploring all the benefits of Copilot on the left-hand side there. And let's face it, there's some amazing opportunities to drive productivity. We know that people who are trialing Copilot at the moment, particularly in the corporate space as well, are seeing huge benefits from Copilot. What we're here today to talk to you about is how do we tackle those things on the right-hand side? And that's where I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleague to take you through a couple of slides just to position it. And then we're going to go actually into a demo of the solution so you can see exactly how you can get a handle on your data. At the end, we're going to wrap up. We're actually going to show you that we have a proof of value that's quite easy for you to get started if that's of interest to you as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so first a question to all of you. How many of you have already enabled Copilot on your tenant? That's great. And I hope the experience has been great so far. We did it. We at AvePoint did enabled artificial intelligence on our data 3 or 4 months back. And we had mixed results. I'll talk about our experience as we go along. 3 things to note before you enable Copilot. One is to make sure your data quality is good, right? Because the quality of data that you have determines the quality of outcome in artificial intelligence, because Copilot is going to read, understand all the data that you have and generate a response. True story, we are a product company, right? We enabled artificial intelligence on our data without cleaning up our data. And there was a ask from a prospective customer for a particular use case. One of our brightest sales executives, and all sales executives are bright in our business, but one of the brightest among them went in and asked that question to Copilot, artificial intelligence. Which product should I sell for this customer? It looked at all the data, gave an immediate response, and the sale was made. Little did we realize that the response was generated from an old user guide based on a feature that is no more available in the product. This, we managed the situation, but think of this. If we have data that is not cleaned up, available for Copilot, thousands of users within your organization are going to ask questions, get response. It's completely different from the earlier world, right? Where at least when you are going to search for it, you at least know which document it is coming from. You go in and you voluntarily will take the data out of the documents. But with Copilot, the response is generated for you. It does give you the reference, but still, because the response is generated, the chances of the data being passed on to an external user is much higher. So quality of data, number one thing to look for. The quality of data is closely linked to how much data you have in the environment. The larger the volume of data that you have in your environment, the difficult it is to manage it, right? And in our sector, we already see that with larger the volume, it's just not a problem with managing the data. It's also the cost of it. Data is no more cheap. It's at least not free anymore, right? It's not as expensive as corporate. So the volume of data also plays a major role. And for the organizations that are not turned down Copilot, one of the major factors apart from the cost, right, is access to it. Everyone is worried about oversharing, because in the world before Copilot, Microsoft encouraged collaboration. it was so easy to share content. You just go into a document, we've all done it, right? We've gone into a document, clicked on share, shared it with people. The level of access that is available, no one has a view on it, right? So the biggest fear factor for organizations is that we don't know who has access to what, right? For example, one of the things that I come across when we go into any organization for a demonstration of a product, the CIO in the organization ends with a question: what is your organization's AI strategy? Right? That's a common question these days. So if I need to find what is my organization's AI strategy, I can actually go and type it in a Word document saying what is my organization's AI strategy. It will fetch the data from wherever I have access to. Obviously, each person's access determine the response, but if my access was more than what I should have, it is going to fetch material non-public information, right? And I wouldn't even know that. I'm going to ask that question because CIO of a university asked me. Copilot will provide the answer from all the documents I have access to, and I might innocently share the data, MNPI data outside my organization. So that's one of the major reasons why organizations are reluctant to turn on Copilot. What we are going to see today is how the solutions provided by us helps us manage each of these. Okay. So now, how do we do it? For organizations that want to take control of the situation, we provide two options. One is an immediate cleanup of both data and the permissions, right? So that's something that we need to do immediately before you turn on the Copilot switch. But then it's for the data that is currently present in the tenant. It's going to grow every day. There are organizations there where 30, 40 terabytes of data gets added every month. So we can't be doing this kind of an immediate cleanup every month, going in and searching for permissions, obsolete data and removing it, right? So this has to be a well-governed system going forward. So the issue that we have today in the environment does not get recreated when new data comes in. Okay. So those are the two things we're going to see. One, how do we handle the immediate cleanup? And then the continuous governance, going forward. Now, to do that, for the short term, for the immediate cleanup, we help with two things. One, to prepare your data, right? Have an understanding of what we have in the tenant, which is hard today. Today, if you go to Microsoft 365, it tells you that you may have 600, 700 terabytes, sometimes even petabytes of data in your tenant. But what is it? What do you have there? What is it made of? How did I even reach so many hundred terabytes or petabyte? That report, those kind of reports are not available. How old they are, how much of it is obsolete, are they inactive, are people really using them, to the granular extent is not available. And those reports are required for us to do a proper cleanup. So that's the first thing, understanding the data. The next thing is, okay, I know there can be a permission problem. I know there can be oversharing in my tenant, but is there really there? How many? Who has access to what? Are there sensitive content that is shared to external people? Are there sensitive content that is shared to everyone in the organization, right? How do I know it? So again, for the short term, we provide reports that allows you to immediately see, do I have a problem? And then turn on Copilot. And if you do have a problem, we also provide solutions to solve that and before you turn on. So that's for the short term. For the long term, we realize and that the data that or the problems that we're going to solve are not problems for us to solve, right? Because we are not the owners of data. The data is owned by the business and the departments. It is ideal that we hand over the data to them and provide them with the responsibility to manage their data. So your HR director should know what data they have and who has permissions on their data. It's not us who need to go and see how much of their data is dormant and clean up, right? Similarly, for your student and faculty boards, they need to know what they have, but they're not technical people. They can't do it on Microsoft 365. You need to provide them tools and processes that allows them to manage. So that's the long-term optimization that we provide. Okay, let's move on and look at each of these phases along with solutions on how we manage them. So let's start with the first of the three. So we talked about three: preparing the data, managing sure you have high quality data in your tenant, managing the permissions on your tenant, and setting up policies for long-term governance. So let's start about how we prepare the data. Obviously, one of the things organizations have done a lot is migrated data into their tenant, right? With COVID and remote working, everyone needed access to data on the cloud. So a lot of data has already been moved to the cloud. How do we classify them and make sure the right data alone sits in your tenant is what we're going to see. For that, I'm going to jump on to a Power BI report that we provide for organizations that work with us. Before I move on to the Power BI, quick note on how it gets generated. So we provide tool set that scans your entire tenant, the millions and billions of files that you may be having in your tenant pretty quickly. And the speed at which we do is for a petabyte of data, we could do a scan in 4 to 5 weeks. And then we have our own rules that classify that content and say, here is a content that has not, here is a file that's migrated 3 years back, not been touched since. So it's probably not required for you. Here is a file that is basically a zip file. What is the role of a zip file in a collaboration environment like Microsoft 365? Zip is an archive, right? So we provide complete insights on that and tell you what exactly you have in tenant and what probably you should retain and what you can probably do away with. So let me jump on to a report that gets presented at the end of the analysis. So this is an example of a report we presented for a customer of ours. These are reports that we have done for months together for corporate customers, right? That's because they did have storage problem for a long time. So what do we do with these reports? So in this case, here is a tenant that has almost 1.2 petabyte of data. We analyzed, it has 1.4 petabytes of data. We analyzed most of it, 1.2 petabyte, to say, out of all the data that we've analyzed, 44% of that is inactive, right? It's at a high level, like this is what your tenant is. 44% of it is inactive. Only 56% of the data is active based on age of the data. And even within that 56%, there's a lot of redundant content, obsolete and trivial content. What do we mean by redundant content? Like duplicates. When people migrate data, there are duplicates created. Obsolete content. I'm sorry.
The question was the inactive data. So you're classifying that based on the time period elapsed, not when it was last accessed.
Okay. We look at, particularly in Microsoft 365, we look at modified time. Accessed is ideally the right way, as you mentioned, but in Microsoft 365, as you may already know, last 6 months of data is alone stored. So if a document is opened 9 months back, it may still be active, but we won't know because the audit doesn't go that far. So that's the reason we use modified time. But when we try to act on the data, like when you do archiving or anything on that data, then we collect the audit for a longer duration and then take actions on it. Okay, so if we look at the modified time here and say 56% of the data is not modified, or rather 44% of the data is not modified in the last X years. And within the data that is active as well, how much of it is redundant and obsolete and trivial. Redundant, this is something that we have seen time and again in multiple tenants. Here is an example of another tenant that I can bring up, which is a bit larger as well. 3 petabyte of data is what they had. We analyzed 2.5 of that, and you can see a lot of redundant data there as well. And I'm sure this will be the case in your tenants as well because of the versioning problem that Jason talked about, right? Every document that you create, particularly Office files, autosaves, and every time it autosaves, a version gets created. Okay, so this is common. So we do this and then we say, here is what you have. And this also speaks to the storage issue. So what we also use this information to say is, with the amount of data that you have currently, you far exceed or you're closer to your storage allocation provided by Microsoft. This is based on your A3 and A5 licenses. And for the extra data that you have, how much you're expected to pay per year for the storage pack that is getting introduced in August or the next renewal of your contract with Microsoft, right? So we provide that. So we just tell you, first we'll tell you what is the quality of data you have, and for the volume of data you have, how much you may likely have to pay Microsoft because of the storage allocation. Now, while this is a summary, we also go in depth into this. And the idea behind this whole reporting is to go deeper and say, okay, I have so much data. Where is it present, right? So here we go in and say, if I leave the how overall data that I have, how much of data is older than 30 months. Like, for example, if you say, okay, let me look at all the data that is older than 36 months. It tells you how much it is. It also tells you how the data is distributed in a tenant. What do people do? Like if you ended up having 2.5 petabyte of data on your tenant, how did it come about, right? Are people creating a lot of movie files? They're creating zip files. So it tells you how much is the contribution of each of this. And this could be different for different tenant, right? So in another tenant, for this tenant, it's a lot of Photoshop files. In another tenant, it clearly tells you that a lot of users are collaborating. So you can see a lot of PPTX files, Excel sheets, MP4, etc. And then you can also further go in and granularly look at it from a OneDrive level or Teams. How is the data distributed? What kind of data is present? What is the age of all the data? How much of it is active? And also provides you with an idea of where exactly it is active. One of the things you may have noticed in your tenant, and we have done this for a number of customers, this kind of reporting for a number of customers. And one of the things that is common is, even though you may have a number of workspaces in your OneDrives and site collections and Teams in your tenant, it's only less than 5% of it that usually holds the data, right? Data, it's not even a 2080 rule. It's a much lesser 595 kind of a rule where the data in every tenant gets focused on smaller number of OneDrives and site collections and Teams. That gives us an opportunity to clean up the data faster, because sometimes organizations look at it and say, my God, I have hundreds of thousands of OneDrives and workspaces. I can't handle it. But then when you look closer, the data is actually in only a very small number of workspaces and OneDrives that you can easily handle. And the reports like this, you can say, oh, I know where to look at. For example, if I go to the Teams report, I have a 16 terabyte of team or a site here that has 3 terabyte that is old. But I have another one that has only 15 terabyte that has only 65. So you know where to focus on. So you know you don't want to focus on a highly active workspace, but there are workspaces that are not active enough that you can focus on. So that's one report that we provide. First of all, like where exactly the data is, what kind of data it is, and how active they are. The other thing we also look at it is, okay, what kind of data and how much obsolete and redundant data you have in your environment. That's also something we show you. So we should look at all that and classify them and say, look, among all the data that you have a lot of redundant content, obsolete content as well. How much of it is like old office files, old video files, old archive files? How much of it is trivial files? Like sometimes organizations, when they migrate the entire C drive with program files and bin files and exes, which don't have a place in your Microsoft 365 environment, right? So we look at all that and say, here are all opportunities for you. Here is what is there in your tenant. And these are opportunities for you to optimize as well as clean up the data so you can better manage its quality. So that's another report that we provide. And here is another one which is real data, where out of 1 petabyte of data, 761 terabytes is just versions, right? Do any of you have retention policy turned on as well in your tenant? Yeah. And I can bet you, if you have retention policy turned on, go look at the versions in your tenant and the redundancy caused by versions. Because when you have retention policy turned on, none of the versions gets deleted, right? Microsoft, a few years back, made 500 versions as mandatory, right? Every library or every file can have up to 500 versions. When you have retention policy turned on, you don't even have that limit. It can go on for any number of versions because you basically said it is retained. The file is retained for X number of years, 5 years or 10 years. So the data will be retained forever. And if I open a PowerPoint file, this PowerPoint deck that I was preparing over the last 3 days, I looked at it. I've already created 25 versions of it, right? 1 month down the line, would I need any of the 24 older versions? I won't. I need the PowerPoint because I could use it for reference, but I don't need any of the 24 versions that I created. Opportunities like this lie everywhere in your tenant, right? And particularly with retention policies. And this is a tenant which had retention policy for 10 years. A lot of version problems would remain. That gives you an opportunity to clean up versions, save storage, improve the data quality, right? And the other thing we also look at it is, okay, now we know what you have in the tenant based on the analysis that is done, how much is active, how much of it is redundant, obsolete, and trivial. Now, what can I save, right? From a storage cost perspective. So this, again, the report allows you to say, okay, among all the data that you have, if you choose to archive content that is older than 24 months, then from just by deleting versions, you can save 273,000, and by archiving, you can save 46,000. Why is archiving an option? If you think about it, even artificial intelligence will work on the data that is only present in Microsoft 365, right? And you want that to work on the data that is current, active, and relevant for your organization. If a document was created and last modified 3 years back, you're better off if now intelligence is generated from it, unless it's a reference document, right? So by archiving that content to a low-cost storage, which could be an Azure Blob storage, not SharePoint, not Microsoft 365, move to a low-cost storage, you, one, save the cost, and two, Copilot will not read it and provide responses for it. So your Copilot responses will be based on all your current data. That's something that, again, the purpose of the report is to give you options and suggestions on what you could do. And then every organization that we work with, again, based on this report, choose that. The reports are even more comprehensive. It further goes in and says, okay, which site, how much of it is rot? If I just work on this site, how much can I save? Why is this important? Because of change management, right? If you have a tenant with 300,000 or 100,000 teams, any change like this is daunting, right? How many people should I call up? How many people should I email to say this is happening in the tenant, right? You don't have to, because as I said, your data is anyway going to be focused and concentrated on certain teams and OneDrives. So you can this report tells you which are the teams and OneDrives where the data is focused on, and which are the teams and OneDrives where there is inactive and rot content. So from 100,000, you're already coming down to probably 1,000 or lesser. And then you can find the owners of those teams and the OneDrives and then tell them, here is what is happening because you have a lot of raw data, because you have probably migrated content from file system that's really old. So it narrows down the problem to a smaller scope that we can easily work with. So that's what it provides. One of the other things that we provide, which can be quite useful, is a projection. Okay. We talk about how data growth is high in tenants these days, and Jason also talked about a case where when people start generating content, and people were manually creating slides and Word document, the data was growing at this rate. When AI starts generating for them, the data growth is going to be multiple times what it was earlier. What this report tells you is, okay, look at the last 6 months data growth in your tenant and tell you how do we expect it to grow over the next 18 months. and then allow you to think about, okay, if it is today a storage cost of £1 million, 18 months down the line, it's going to be 1.9 million pounds. If it is 3 petabyte today, it could be 4.2 petabytes in 18 months. So are we ready to handle it? This is what the report. We built this report because one of our corporate customers wanted to build a case study for their upper management to say what is the kind of risks we face, and this report was built for that. So that's the report that we provide. So we provide a Power BI report as at the end of this analysis to tell you what exactly you have and how you can deal with it. Now, along with that, we also provide suggestions on what exactly you can do to. So, for example, we could say, having looked at your tenant, here is how much data that you have that can be moved to a cheaper storage, right? How much it can be deleted because it's versions, and then ask customers to make a decision. What do you want to do? Given that these are what we have found in your tenant, do you want to work on it? And usually customers then come back and say, okay, I've given you 10 suggestions. Here are suggestions S1, 2, 3, and 4 I want to go with. The rest are a bit more risky for us to take and help do the change management. Along with the reporting, we also provide solutions that does the cleanup for you as well. So if we make that choice, okay, clean up the versions, clean up raw data, move that to an archive content and bring down my storage, our solutions will also do it. Here is an example of what we did as a five-day exercise for one of our customers. 194 terabyte of their data was either archived or version deleted. That saved them quite a bit of dollars, as well as brought down the data that they have to manage to a manageable number. Okay, so that's the first step. In terms of what we provide, ability to analyze your data, tell you where the problem is, and clean up. Any questions on that before I move on to the second one? Okay, cool. So the next step, once you've analyzed your data, cleaned up, your surface area of how much data that you need to work with and manage obviously reduces. So within that, the next thing we need to do before we turn on Copilot is make sure that there is no oversharing, there's no permissions problem, or at least as minimal as possible. And how do we do that? Very similar. We provide, again, analysis engines that allows you to scan your entire tenant and tell you where the permissions problem are. So here is an example of a report that we generate. So the report we generate scans the entire tenant and tells you, one, if you have sensitive content, how much of your data is sensitive, like it may have personal information, customer information, financial information, etc. How much of your data has within the content, and how much of it is exposed to a larger number of people. Having sensitive content within your tenant is not a problem, right? Obviously, organizations may choose to have Microsoft 365 as the data store for confidential data. That is not a problem. It becomes a problem when the sensitive content is visible to a lot more people than it has to be, right? And that's what this report tells you. So this report tells you how much of your documents are sensitive, the scale of sensitiveness in the documents, and then the scale of exposure as well. So here, obviously, this 732 documents, even though they are exposed quite a bit, they're not that sensitive. So you don't have to worry too much. But think of this 194 documents. It has analyzed the entire tenant and said, here are 194 documents that are highly sensitive and highly exposed as well. When we say highly exposed, it means a lot of people within your organization have access to of those documents, and those documents, based on the content within them, appear to be sensitive. So that's the report it provides. And with that, you can even go in and see which are those documents, right? So you can go in and see, so here is a customer data for Project Falcon, which obviously, because it has customer data, we have gone through the document, looked at what information it has, and said, here is a customer data, so hence it is sensitive, and it is also highly exposed because it probably is accessible to everyone in the organization or a large number of people. So again, the idea is to look at your tenant, generate a report of what, you can also generate a report to say, what is the state of my tenant? Is it safe for me to allow people to use Copilot given the current state? So what the report will, it will provide a report which says, here is the risk summary for your organization. How much of your tenant data is sensitive and how much of it is enabled for external and internal large group of people. And then it further dwells down into who are those people who have access to it. It also says what kind of sensitive content do you have? Do you have customer information? Do you have financial information? How many such content is there? How many highly confidential content you have? It also goes in and says within Teams, how much is it? Within OneDrive, how much is it? Within, if it is within OneDrive, who are your OneDrive users who have been sharing a lot of sensitive data, right? And allows you to take control of it. If the report says your data, your tenant is pretty much well managed, you can safely, at least with a peace of mind, turn on Copilot. So that's the primary purpose of these reports. These reports, when it is, the way we do it is we point our solution to your tenant, run it. We can do it as a POC or we can scan the entire tenant and allow you to go in and see what you, fully comprehensive data of how much teams you have, how much private teams you have. Within private teams, how much of it has, let's say, shadow users. You're aware of shadow users, right? So when you create a team, you add members and owners to a team. But then within that document, within a team, someone can share it with another external person who is not even a member or owner of a team. That's what we call shadow users. And as owner of a team or data owner, you may not even know that the document has been shared out, right? These are like invisible permission problems. So this looks at those invisible permission problems and says, can you tell me what all teams I have which has shadow users, which has, let's say, sensitive level is high or risk level is high, and filter it. So it can filter it. And so in my case, I don't have any. So at least then I know I don't have any teams that has shadow users and sensitive content. So that way you can verify what your tenant has, what kind of teams have, what permissions it has, and then take a call on what you want to manage. Okay, so that's the other thing it provides. Finally, most organizations also do Copilot enablement for certain users, right? It's almost like a pilot of Copilot. If you're doing that, one of the things this report allows you to do is go and search for and see for the users for whom you're enabling Copilot, how is the permission model, right? One of the organizations we are working with are trialing Copilot with 30 users. So they will use this system to say, okay, I'm going to trial Copilot with, let's say, Yatindra here. They will look at it and say, is it safe to enable Copilot for Yatindra? So this report will tell you, okay, Yatindra today has access to these workspaces and teams and content. And then if all these workspaces are workspaces that Yatindra is okay to have access to, then it is safe. Of course, you can't do this for your entire tenant, but if you're doing it as a trial for certain users to check the productivity benefits of Copilot, one of the options you can do is for the users you have picked for trial, you can use this to search and provide the benefits. Any questions on the permissions report? Do you currently do such kind of permissions reporting on your tenant? Don't. Okay. I mean, Microsoft does provide a minimal permissions reporting in Purview that you could use. But if you want to go further in depth and see what really are the problems and generate a report of sensitivity and exposure within your content, these kinds of reports will help. Okay. So I'll skip on to the rest of the sections. Okay. In addition to providing the sensitive report, what it also, similar to how when we did the data analysis, we provide recommendations on what data actions you can do, what optimizations you can do. Even when we do the permissions reporting, we'll provide recommendations on what you can do. So this is based on the user behavior within your tenant. For example, we see, as per the analysis of your tenant, there are 11 external users in your Microsoft Teams. There are 2 external users in your group. If you don't want this to continue and you want to restrict external user access to your tenant, here is a policy that you can enable. So you can first clean up this permissions, and also you can go in and enable a policy in the system that prevents users from providing access to external users. It says 354 Teams has shadow users. The one I mentioned, where you may not realize that those people are having access to content within the team, but the particular documents have been shared with the other users. So these are called shadow users. So in this tenant, it says so many teams have shadow users. It looks like as a user behavior, there needs to be a training that needs to be provided to your users because they've been doing this kind of sharing. Plus, you can also have policies built in that goes ahead and cleans up and avoids this from happening in future, in addition to cleaning up what is currently present. So that's with respect to checking your permissions before Copilot. So that's for your short-term ones. Analyze your data, clean up the data, make sure your data is high quality before you turn on Copilot. Analyze your permissions, clean up the permissions, set up policies to ensure that doesn't happen. That's your second step. Once that is done, you're pretty much in a decent place, and enable Copilot with some kind of a peace of mind saying it's not probably going to cause any kind of risks of exposure.
Can I ask a question? Your tool up to now appears to be very useful, but it is dependent on the algorithms within it. Yeah. So you're giving us examples of results that come out. How can we test those algorithms? Can we use that tool on a paired set of data that we've put in different classified types of document?
Yep.
And the algorithms, can they be modified in any way?
Absolutely.
So what you've decided is sensitive, we could tweak and say, well, actually that isn't, or that is.
Yeah, definitely.
No, it's good. It's a good question. Yeah, it's good.
It's a good. So what? So yes, the tool comes with default definitions on what exactly is sensitive, what is exposure, what is obsolete data. It's all default definitions, but you can change them. You can say, and one of the things that we do and we implement it for organizations in a large scale is sit with them and define this. We say these are our profiles. This is how we define what is a risk definition, what is a risky document in your content. You can completely change it. Plus, you can also add new risk definition. For example, you may have a student number or a vendor number, which is of particular type, like particular regular expression that we may not even know. It may not be there in the system. But you may say, if I have a document that has the student number data and the data within it, it actually is a sensitive document because it has student information in it. So can you go and create a risk definition that adds that particular regular expression, search for it in all the documents. If any document has that, then it is a sensitive document that I need to handle with care. You can add those as well. And same with raw definitions as well. We provide rules, but you can change it. To your first question of, can you do it on a prepared data? Some organizations do it that way. So what we call it as a POV, proof of value kind of an exercise. So before we turn it on your entire tenant and then scanning it, we provide a POV exercise where you can prepare your data, come with say 100 terabytes of data for scanning, or any small volume that you want to bring, and we will scan it, provide the results, work with you on, like, do workshops with you to say what the results say, and then move to the larger tenant.
We're trying to, with a proof of value, just make it indicative for the kinds of things we're going to see. So research data, for example, maybe some professional services in there as well, so that actually you can extrapolate the results out of that for what you're going to expect to see more at a tenant level as well.
Just got a question. It's actually about how Copilot works. You were talking about being able to test what the permissions of a particular user were to see if it was safe for them to turn the Copilot. Is it not possible to constrain Copilot so it only scans trusted data sources? And so, because getting to the point when the other bit of the tendency is sharing stuff with all users without being managed is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. So to be honest, Microsoft is realizing that people will not be able to turn it on for the entire tenant. Currently, they're adding features on that. Currently, they've provided the other way. You can choose certain content and then say exclude this, because instead of, but ideally, I'm with you on that. I was talking to our product team as well. Ideally, the thing we need is, I am very sure about this content.
Yeah,
Use
that's
only
the
this for Copilot.
process and the opt-out process.
Yeah. I've done all my research. I've done my analysis on this data. Allow Copilot only on this data. And then I keep expanding that scope as I am more comfortable. That would be the ideal way. But today it's not that. It is the other way. But you can also, one thing you can do is in Microsoft 365 is, let's say you do have a like a executive team has certain teams, site collections and OneDrives, and you're not sure about their permissions. And you know these are the 10 teams that your executive team is using. You can go in and forget all the permissions that are there within that executive team. Maybe there are individual documents that people have access to that I don't know. I'm going to set permissions at a higher level. Use only that. Whatever is inside is no more valid. You can do that. It's a bit of a brute force method of cleaning up things without realizing what is inside. Microsoft provides these two options today because many organizations, as I mentioned earlier, do not go for Copilot for this reason, because I don't know what's going to happen, right? So that's okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll move on to the last section of this presentation where we talk about, okay, now that we've done a quick cleanup of data as well as permissions using the tool sets and the reports, how do I make sure we put in governance and practices in place so this doesn't happen for data that gets created in future? So that's where we bring in solutions that allow you to govern both your workspaces and your content from the time it is created, right? So when a workspace is created, we provide tools that are within team itself. So where you can go in and say, I want a new workspace. You go in and you specify information about why you need the workspace. I want a new workspace because I'm going to store sensitive data in it, or I want to share it with partners, etc. We collect all the data, and then within that, we provide opportunity to renew the workspaces. What happens usually in organizations is you create teams and site collections and OneDrives, you share it with people, and then the user moves to a different department, they move out of the organization, but then they still have permissions. They still have entries within it, right? 6 months down the line, you go and look at it, you do not know, are the right people have permissions on it? So the way we solve that problem is by having renewal processes built in place. So if I am a business user who creates a team, and I say this is going to have confidential data in it because I'm going to have documents related to a merger and acquisition, then every month, because it is confidential data, every month it's going to send me a report saying, today, here are the people who have access to it, your content. Do you agree to this? So as an IT or a platform owner, we don't have to worry. It goes to the business, and the business is able to review who has permissions on it, what kind of data is there, and approve that every month. On the other hand, you may actually create a site or a team that is not that important, right? It's just for policy documents that you're storing for future reference. In that case, you can say, I don't need renewal every month, but we do it once a year, right? So you can specify these governance policies where basically you have moved the responsibility of managing the data to the business, who are the rightful people, and allow them to manage their own data by giving them tools where it provides them report every month or every year saying, here are the people having permissions, here are the people who are owning the data in your team or workspace. Are you okay with it? And they approve it. It gets stored in your tenant. So you have audit capabilities as well to see who has approved it. And if they think something is wrong, they can change it themselves. And also content expiration as well. Many times what happens is people create workspaces. For example, I'm sure we have created a workspace for this event, right? And stored documents within it. 6 months down the line, it may not be necessary, right? But our marketing team, which created this workspace, is the one who's going to decide. If we are deciding, we'll use the 2-year rule. So the content will be there for 2 years unnecessarily. So the content expiration rules also gets set in place, and the marketing team gets a message every at the end of 6 months saying you created this documents. It's been 6 months. Do you really need it? And then if they say don't need it, it automatically gets archived or deleted, right? We also leverage what Microsoft provides as part of retention labels. I don't know if you use retention labels in your tenant. Many customers don't use it because manually setting retention label is hard. Users won't know which retention label to use. Our solution will, based on rules, apply the retention label and make sure that if you have a contract, it stays for 7 years, if that is what your compliance need is. And if it is a brochure or another document, it can be treated as an information of temporary value and deleted. So all those kind of rules can be built into the system. So that's something that we can do as part of this data lifecycle management as well. And finally, we'll also provide admin reports that tell you today across the board, not just in your Microsoft 365 tenant, if you store data in other locations, including file system or Azure file share, what kind of data you have, how much of it is data that is important for your organization that you have retained, how much of it is temporary value that has been archived or deleted. So it provides a single pane of glass kind of a report that tells you what do you really have across multiple data sources. So you have a good handle of the data that you're managing within your organization. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in terms of long-term governance as well. And here is an example of the steps we follow for proof of value. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll cover that. So thank you. Arthur alluded to the proof of value, which is on a small subset of data to make it easy for universities to start experimenting with this and understanding their data a little bit more. We've highlighted here the 5 steps. They are actually on the back of the brochure there as well on the table. So if you want to have a look at that and study it, then please do. But essentially, we've got 5 steps here. So the start is the analysis of the 100 terabytes, which, as you can tell from Partha, if you can do a petabyte in 5-6 weeks, it's actually a fairly quick process. Obviously, we need to understand, as Mary asked earlier, about what data are we actually going to pick. So we need to go through that process. Once we've done that, we can actually then go through that data with you at the end in workshops to say, this is what we found, this is the report. And actually, there's going to be some key things that come out of that. And that's where Partha and his team are going to be bringing in those rules that they went through with you to say, these are the rules we'd probably recommend based on what we found. But again, they can be tailored. So after that, we can actually then start optimizing that data. So if you start with 100 terabytes, you can start seeing how that's actually optimized, whether it's being deleted, whether it's actually being archived. We actually also run an end user workshop for a small group of people. So if you've got a small group and you'd like to enable them with some training, after the possible, some scenarios around how they can use Copilot, we can run that as well. We didn't mention it earlier, but actually part of our organization, we help with the adoption engagement around 365 as well. So we can run that for your early adopters. So you can be running that in parallel to the data piece as well, just to understand what the benefits are from a user perspective. The risk assessment is, again, what Partha showed there. We would probably typically run that on around 5 terabytes of data, again, where you know there's sensitive data, just to bring back those reports and give you some indicative ideas as to how that looks within your tenant. And at the end, we pull all of that together into a report for you. So you can actually start working on your roadmap. There's going to be some recommendations in there as well. Some of that might be working with AvePoint, some of it might not be, but there's going to be some really good information in there to help you to make some strategic decisions on what you do next. So that's what the proof of value looks like. As I say, we're on booth 80. If you want to come and find us, if you want to organise a one-to-one and come and talk about the intricacies of your own tenants, because I know they're all obviously very different. Happy to do that. Partha will be here all of today. So if you want a more technical demonstration, Partha's here today. He won't be here tomorrow though, but the rest of the AvePoint team will be at the desk all day tomorrow as well. So does anyone else have any other questions based on what they've seen today? Okay. So the proof of value is 24K, and that covers, yep, yep, yep. So yeah, if you're interested, come and find us. I think you know where we are, and we're happy to talk about it with you. All right, I hope that's been useful. Thank you.